Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you as I always do from my little shrine here in the Wood of the Holly, my television studio apartment. And as I begin season number 6, I have an incredibly special and unique guest to begin this next season of my podcast. This gentleman is coming to us from the Black Hills of South Dakota, specifically Leeds, South Dakota, and he has really one of the most distinguished ancestries that anyone could imagine. With me today is Ernie LaPointe, and he is the great grandson of, I want to say this right because I always blow it. Oh God, here it is. Tatanke Iyotake, otherwise known to most Americans as Sitting Bull, but the proper name would be Buffalo Bull, who sits down. With me today is his great grandson, Ernie LaPointe, Kangisi, otherwise known as Crowfoot. I want to extend to you a deep thank you and welcome to my show. Thanks for agreeing to be here. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. Now let's just start out from the beginning to kind of give people an idea about this process. When we first spoke, you asked that I send you a package of tobacco so that you could perform a ceremony to, I guess, get permission from the spirit world to talk to me. Maybe you could share with me a little bit about that as we just get started here.
Sure. The reason for that is, I did a lot of lectures around the country and around the world, and this is the standing order. My wife usually is the one that relates this to, people who want me to talk, because it is a gift to the spirits for me to ask for their permission to speak about them or even use their name, and then speak about spiritual things, that people ask me about. So it's basically a way for me to not cross lines between this world and the world that's unseen, and my ancestors that are over there. That they will help and also guide me to answer questions and whatever else that people want to know. So that's basically why I do this. Most natives don't do that, but if you're a traditional, which I do, I live my traditional way of life. I'm a sun dancer. I did my own ceremonies, and I have a ceremonial room here in my home. And I go in there and I have my spiritual items in there, and that's where the tobacco I put in there. And I talk to the spirits. I ask them. I says, this inquiring mind is going to ask me questions. And I says, speak through me if you ask questions that I don't have a clue about. But most of the time, I says, I do know the answers. So that's why I ask for this tobacco. It's a gift to the spirits for me to speak to you.
Well, please share with the spirits my gratitude for this conversation. I appreciate it, and I want to honor them through you. So you're coming to me from the Black Hills, not far from Deadwood, and the Black Hills is a very special place for the Lakota people. Maybe you could let's just get started with that geography and what that means, the Black Hills, to your history and your culture.
Well, from my understanding, there's a lot of things about the Black Hills that the Lakota people find special. It is one of our creation stories comes through here. A place down there called Wind Cave. The people went underground when purification came, and they went underground and they came up out there. And then there's another place they call Preshla. Preshla means a bald hill. And they say through there the spirits, help the people understand and come out and learn the sacredness of this Black Hills. And we call it Chesapa, it's Black Hills, because from a distance they look black, the trees. But also, it's a sacred place because a lot of individuals were buried here. It's like a burial grounds. along the outer edges and sometimes on the inside of the Black Hills. And there's many unusual and special areas in the Black Hills that have certain values spiritually to the Lakota people, and for them to understand, like we have just to the northeast of the Black Hills here is Bear Butte.
Mm-hmm.
Bear Butte is just north of Sturgis, where they used to have the motorcycle rallies. But it's a big mountain, looks like a bear laying down. And there's a story to that, and then you go further west, and the Washichu, as we call them, the white man, the Americans come in here and they seen this big, tall spear up in the air. They call it Devil's Tower, which is not what it is. So it's a tree stump. It was a tree stump, and these little 7 girls are being chased by this huge bear. And they jumped on this tree stump and they offered their prayers to Tatanke, the great mystery, to help save them from this bear. And then this tree stump started growing. And it grew, and this bear came up there and he tried to climb up. You see the side of this tree stump. You see where he scratched it. Eventually, he gave up and came east, and he laid down. And that's where Bear Butte is. So Bear Butte is like our sacred church. So we do go to our humbalichas and our purification ceremonies there. It is a sacred area there.
And now that would be northwest of where you're sitting in Wyoming, with what you just described, the trees.
The tower, yeah, the Makoti, we call it, or some call it the Shines. I think somebody else calls it the Greyhorn Butte and stuff like this, but it's not Devil's Tower.
Right.
See, anything that the Americans don't understand, they equate it to hell or devil. So these are sacred areas of ours, and then here in the Black Hills, in the center part, they used to call it Harney Peak, named after some Washicha guy who hated natives. Now they changed the term to Black Elk Peak, after one of our medicine men. And that peak is known as, in the old days, it was called the Owl Mountain, because when people pass away, their spirits launch to travel back to the spirit world from that Owl Mountain, which is Black Elk Peak, and they travel the star trails back to the spirit world. So there's a lot of places, like I say, that are sacred to the Lakota people, because it's a see, in the Lakota people with the culture, we live with this. We live for the future. We don't live in the past. The past is over. Yesterday's over with. What happened yesterday can't change. You can't say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to change what happened yesterday, because all you're doing is you're just standing in a circle. I mean, you're standing still and you're spinning your wheels. So you have to go forward, and you have to, within yourself, the ecosystem here, it balances itself. The 4-legged, the green growing things, the 2-legged, the river, the water, the wind, and all these things are part of this balancing the ecosystem. But within us, we have that. Our spirit that's in us comes here and enters this body. And this body, it's like it's home for a certain amount of time. And it has to learn to balance its own ecosystem. Compassion, generosity, humility, fortitude, what's in us. The spirit learns these things, how to balance it. And a lot of things in the Lakota culture is humor. Humor is our greatest asset. We laugh at each other, we tease each other. We if we like you, we tease you.
Oh, good.
If nobody teases you amongst the Lakota people, they don't like you.
Okay, well,
that doesn't mean that they don't respect you or they don't like you. So that's our humor. But we also have other fears. One of them is fear. Fear is the greatest asset that's controlling the world today. When the Washichu, the Americans first came to our turtle island, they came with fear. And they still live in fear, even to this day. The fear is elevated in there, and that controls these other emotions, the generosity, the compassion, the humility, the fortitude, and humor. Fear overrides it. I mean, you look across this country, how many households? If you're in the lead, there's a guy who lives on the road who has 70 guns. You know, them guns they say, oh, I fear for my life. You know, I have to protect my property. Well, one day they're going to be dead, and that property is still going to be there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
why you want to shoot somebody with a gun? I mean, this is fear. And on the other hand, see, these are the things that my great grandfather understood in his walk in life is to see. People say he was a leader, and see again the Americans who wrote these books and said all these things. They didn't realize, they didn't understand what the Lakota or native cultures were. Now, I can only speak for my great grandfather. I can't speak for other nations. But to me, I was told through ceremony that my great grandfather was not a leader. He was a sun dancer. That's what he told me in the ceremony. And he said he didn't lead people, or he didn't like a president or general or anything. He was a caretaker, provider, and he was a spokesperson for his people. And people liked him because of his generosity, his compassion, and how he spoke for the spiritual side of people. You know, that these people need to live a certain way. So he was the spokesperson. He went before the councils and spoke on behalf of his tribe or his nation. And so the people just gradually like to be around him because of his aura, I guess you might say. So this is what he was. You know, he was a spokesman. He didn't lead people. He didn't tell them. That's where you have your councils. You have a council member. All these, each little band within the Huapa Nation had little bands, had representatives. And this is where Ben Franklin, Thomas Paine, and Thomas Jefferson stole it from the Six Nations Confederacy. And they created the Congress and Senate and president, you know, because this is in a vice president, because you had a first chief, a second chief, and you have council members, and you have this representatives from each nation, with the six council of nations. They had two representatives, and behind them sat, with each little tribe, they had bands that were chosen to listen in on this, to decision making. But the final bad, powerful one within the nations, in the Lakota, especially what my grandmother told me, is the woman's voice. The woman had the final say in the decisions that are made. And most of these guys who are in the council or who are, you know, in certain positions, a lot of them were chosen by the women, the elder women. They chose these guys because they knew how to balance their ecosystem, or what I say, it's in them, the compassionate generosity, the humility and the fortitude and the humor. And they cared for all things, not just favorites or nothing. Even those that didn't, they may not, you know, like because of the things, they still cared for them. They still spoke with them. They still took them. They need help. They were there for them. Whether there was, you know, and his fear is what causes greed, jealousy, racism, and all that. And see, we didn't have that as Lakota people. And then Americans tell me, oh, I'm free. We have no word for free in Lakota because that's how we were when we were born. We're born into this free atmosphere. And there's no identification of who we were. There's no liberals, conservatives, right, left, or anything. We were all just humans. And we had a council that you sat together to make decisions for the people. You know, you might have some that had ideas this way and some ideas this way, but they knew how to come to a consensus to a center to actually work it out. And see and the number one value on that is the women had the final say on the decisions these men made. If the women didn't like it, these guys who made these decisions were on thin ice.
I'm always on thin ice. I live on thin ice. That's the story of my life. So much thin ice, I'm practically drowning all the time. I mean, that's the story of my life, on thin ice. Well, what you're saying is so interesting because much of the foundational ideas of our own democracy are really taken from the American tribal people, and that to me is something that doesn't get the credit it deserves in the history books. Is the basic idea of trying to find consensus of of elected representatives, of compromise. These ideas really we can find their origin amongst American tribal people, and as you described it, that's the first thing that hit me. Now, you talk about freedom. I mean, we all have our own idea of freedom, but as I read your fantastic account of Tatanke Iyotake, your great grandfather, one of the things that hit me was the absolute idyllic world, seemingly so, that he was born into before the encroachment of the Wachika, or the white people. Just this incredible life of under the expansive plains and the buffalo, and his apprenticeship from his uncles, how he gets his name. He's originally Jumping Badger, and these qualities that you just described that he seemed to embody even as a young guy on the plains. Those stories to me, as you related in your book, are really beautiful.
It is. It was a. It sounds beautiful, but actually it was a hard life because everything you do in that time, it's difficult because you always have to have that. Like I just told you with that tobacco, you always have to ask permission to pick sage, or when you take a buffalo, how you have to honor the spirit of that four-legged brother because it gave its life to you and your family too, its flesh to have you survive. And it's every part of him you use. But you also got to honor and respect his spirit. So you eat its liver when you take it. Right in front of the spirit of this buffalo. You eat his liver. Say, it's the most vile part of him. But you honor him because he gave his life for you to survive your people. So you show the spirit of that buffalo that, I'm eating your liver to show my respect to you. And then after all this is done, even the skull of the buffalo is sacred, to us. So I have mine in the ceremonial room there. And then the same way with the eagle feathers that we have. Everything that we have in our ceremonies represents that balance in who we are, to understand that we have a way of life. They call it a culture, but to us, it's a way of life of our people. And it's a hard life, but with humor, we get through it. People ask me this is, people are racist towards you. People, I said, we laugh at them. I said, those of us who speak Lakota, because we laugh at these guys. We say, man, how can I lower myself to their level and be like them, or a suit and tie and $500 Bruno Mali shoes or whatever, and think you have degrees hanging on a wall. My degree is my chanupa, my pipe. That's it was a hard time to get that pipe. I had a difficult time. I had to show my creator, Wakantanka, that I'm going to walk with this pipe with honor and respect. Because there's songs that everything we do. You're going to take a buffalo, it's a song. If you're going to go raid a crow camp for its horses, there's a song for that. You do everything in song. You even have a death song. So when your time, you're going to go into battle or something, and then you always protect your soul. So that soul will be intact when it leaves here. It goes back to the spirit world. And you don't fear death. You don't fear the creator. See, this is one of the things that we were told in the ceremony is the American organized religious leaders. They talk about fear God, fear death. Well, there's a thin line between fear and humble. The Lakota people, we humble ourselves before the Creator. We don't fear the Creator. We humble ourselves because it's energy that comes to us is what gives us direction in finding who we are. We don't want to be like you. I don't want to be like nobody else. I just want to be like myself. And to find myself, I have to go through life, trials and tribulations. You know, I've been to war. I've been an alcoholic. I did all these things. But these were just things that I learned so I can talk about them later on. I lived on the streets for 4 years, you know, from one end of the country to the other with other Vietnam vets because we did not believe in a system that sent us to war and they didn't care about us. So there was much things that happened with us, with me anyway, and in my journey to be, well, I'm sitting here in front of you. And, you know, on my great grandfather's time, they were a little different. You know, they were harder by what they do because they didn't have cars, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have all this stuff. But the bottom line is the core foundation of our Lakota culture is our women. And see, this is where, but now you have some women that don't have that same value. They kind of went off on a tangent. And back in the days when my great grandfather was here, the spiritual medicine men were always together like this. But now you have the infighting, you know, and then you have those that say they're medicine men, confuse people because it all boils down to Muzaska, money. Money is what's the, I guess you might say the sore spot in Washito American culture. Everybody does everything for money. You know, anything happens, they want to do it for money. You know, everything has to be, and they can't share anything because if they do, it takes away from their money. And all these billionaires and millionaires who are in Congress and Senate, if their money's gone, what's it gonna? I bet you what they're gonna do is they're gonna commit suicide because they don't know what to do with it. Live without money. I've lived on the streets with no money. The only clothes I had was ones on my back and another set in my bag and my sleeping bag and rode the freights, you know, and lived off the land. You know, this is one of the values of being on the street. It was we learned how to live off the land. You know, we catch animal, you know, four leggeds, you know, and there were six of us who were native and one white guy. He was a Navy corpsman and served in Vietnam with the Marines. And he had his little bag with him and, you know, his medicine in there in case something happens to us. He doctored us. And he was our savior, you know, in terms of, you know, whatever happens to us out there in flights or whatever. But the rest of us were natives. You know, we weren't all one tribe, we're all different tribes, all Vietnam vets. And, you know, we traveled all over the country, you know, and, you know, we go up to Seattle, we go up to Florida, we go down to California or Arizona. And we did all this traveling on freight trains. I don't think you can do that anymore.
No.
But now, but back in them days was the Burlington Northern train with, you know, the yard dogs, they call them on the train stations. They would tell us which tracks, Burlington Northern. Don't get on Santa Fe or Pacific or whatever it is. They'll throw you in jail. So we ride the Northern, and you know, it was a life that, you know, to me, you know, people say, "Oh, you had a hard life." No, it wasn't. It was a learning trip. I learned that I can live without money. I can learn that I can live off the land. I learned that, you know, even though we were non-vets and, you know, we didn't have any real understanding of the creator or anything to do with the government or anything, we believed in each other. We survived. We were survivors. And that's how we did until we all eventually came in and became, uh, I mean, most of them guys are probably not here anymore, you know, but somehow or another, creator had me live this long to share my stories with individuals such as yourself.
Well, thank you. One of the questions I have, because you are a Vietnam veteran and uh, Tatanke Iyotake spent his time, you know, some of his time, holding off the U.S. Army. And I don't know if you were in the Army or the Navy or what, but how did you come to either you got drafted or how did you feel about being in the military after your ancestor had fought it so fiercely in defense of his culture and land?
Well, actually, what happened is, in his time, my great grandfather's time, they protected their soul, they protected their spirit with the paint. And John Wayne and all these guys would say, "Oh, he's putting on his war paint." Well, it's not war paint; it's a paint that protects your soul. So you don't do it to go to battle. You do it when you go on a hunt. Like, say you're going to hunt buffalo, and there's a million buffalo out there, and you're out there trying to, you know, get one. And say your friend falls off his horse, and there's all these buffalo are running, and they ran over him. And after they get through running over him, you get to taking up pieces. But the pain protects your soul. It's a traumatic event, that he's laying in pieces. And you gather his remains and you bring it home. You bring it back to the camp, and then you understand that, what happened to him is his spirit is what you're looking for. He's going back to spirit world. But his remains, they do a ceremony, and then when you wipe the paint off, you're still that whole person because your soul was not wounded. And well, the reason I went into the military was my mother passed when I was 10, and my father died when I was 17. And I was a loner. I was the only child between my mom and my dad. I had half sisters and half brothers, both sides, but I didn't really connect well with them because we didn't have the same mother or the same father.
Right, right.
So I had friends, and my mother always told me, find yourself. Said, whatever you do, you have to learn things. Don't ever be afraid of anything. So most guys were afraid to go in the military because of Vietnam. In 1966, I was 18 years old, and I happened to walk down the streets in Rapid City, South Dakota, and there's a building there with all these recruiters, the Army, Navy, Marines, and I almost joined the Marine Corps. I mean, the Marines only went out there, and I told them, I said, well, let me think about it. So I thought about it. I went to see my friends and asked them about the Marines, and most of the guys that I knew, they were older than I was. My brothers were older than me, and they all were in the Army. So they said the Army, they don't know nothing about the Marines or the Navy or the Air Force or whatever. So I said, well, I'll try it. So I went back to join the Marines, and he wasn't there. The Army guy was there, so he signed me up, and that's why I went into the Army in
Okay.
1966. Then I was again, according to the history books and the movies, you have these warrior societies, they call them, right? But that's not what they were. They were societies, but they were warrior societies. So, I guess most of the guys who went into the military, most of the Lakota guys from here that I know, they're either in the special forces, Rangers, or airborne. We all jumped out of airplanes, because I was in the airborne. And I went to Vietnam. I was with the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, and a lot of my friends and my cousins, I got a couple of cousins that were in the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam. And but as we go along there, that was, I think that was kind of a mental thing in the back of our minds that we want to be in these elite units because the warrior societies they talked about, which is not what they were. Later on, I find out they're not. They were honorable men who were in a group that they call it okulakichi, a friendship, a group that took to themselves to protect, provide, and take care of the camp, the people. And they weren't. They could be warriors if they wanted to be to protect, but they were also counselors. That and see in our people, in our culture back before the Washita came in or the Americans came into our area, they always say, "Oh, the Sioux were the most warrior-like people." Well, they weren't really warrior-like. It was like a game. You had a little stick, call it acoustic. I mean, when the French call it acoustic, you touched your adversary without killing him. You put a welt on his arm or something with this stick, And his friend seen you, your friend seen you, and that's where you got to wear the eagle feather straight up in your hair.
So that was a question I had reading your book. What that meant was taking coup, C-O-U-P. What that didn't mean killing a crow or your adversary. It meant something else. And could you expand on that? Because I was a little unclear when I read it.
You just kind of like embarrassed him in front of his people, you
Uh-huh.
know. And you didn't kill him, but you whatever status he had, he went down to the lower. He had to work his way back up to there. But you kind of you touched him with your stick, and that's when you were honored with this eagle feather. You worked straight up in your hair. And then as a Vietnam vet, I have an eagle feathers too, but they were hang straight on my back. That's the seventh honor of the eagle feather. That's the lowest honor, is because you went to war where they killed each other. And went to Vietnam and didn't protect myself with the paint because I had put that away after the treaties of 1868. The Lakota people said, we're not going to war against you anymore. So we're going to put this aside, the ceremony. Little did they realize we're going to have World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and even Afghanistan and in this Iraq wars, that the protection wasn't there. So they didn't. So now what they do is they told me is I tell this to young men if they want to join the military. Go to a purification ceremony, come out and do bring back the songs of honor with the paint. And you can't paint yourself anymore, but you paint under your armpits. And that protects. I mean, after the first shower, it's going to wash off, but the significance of that paint is still there to protect your soul. So if you go into war, you'll be protected. And when you come back and get out of the military, go to a purification, have them wipe it off, and you're a whole person again. So these traumatic events of, killing each other in battle, you're protected. And see, that's what they did when Washichu armies came, the American armies, like Little Bighorn. Most of the guys who fought Custer were painted up so that, they didn't have that traumatic event. But they didn't follow my grandfather's vision to the end.
Right.
See, that's what caused what's happening right now amongst the Native people, the Lakota people here, is he told them not to take the spoils. Don't take their clothes, don't scalp them, don't take their food or horses, just leave them as they lay. And he says, the outcome would be a lot more powerful than what it was. And that's what they did, though. I mean, I can imagine, they kept getting pushed, kept getting attacked, at the middle of the night or whatever. And a lot of the Cheyenne women that were there with the Little Bighorn were survivors of the Washita in Oklahoma, where Custer attacked them and killed women and children and raped them and stuff, So what they did to him, with sticking them sewing owls in his ear, so he might have ears in the spirit world. And then they stuck them up his penis because of what he raped them. And then they butchered a lot of the other ones because it was just the anger, and see, this is what's happening right now, is the anger, the rage, the jealousy, the amongst the Native people because of that. It's a curse. It cursed our nation.
And that was
a division.
And that was a curse that your great grandfather predicted in his vision. If they were to violate, they could violate the victims of the war, of that battle. And that brings me to something I really am trying to understand, because it's in your book, is the circumstances of Tatanke Iyotake's death at the hands of
his own people.
His own people. But I think it has to be said that McLaughlin and the agency, the white agency people, created the circumstances to a large extent where this could happen. And as you describe in your book, that these divisions, start from this moment to this very present day amongst the Lakota people. And there was something you said in the book about you have 4 generations to sort of make amends after this kind of thing. And I just want you to talk about that, because it's tragic and, insightful.
Well, back in that time, before the Americans came here. If a Lakota happens to kill another Lakota, say, whether it's over a woman or whether it's over a horse or whether it's an accident or whatever, you killed another Lakota. So what they did when you do that is the council gets together and they say, okay, you took a life. You took this person's life. So what they do is they strip them naked and they banish them. And they give him 4 years. If he survives the elements, most of them usually don't because a coal or a bear or a wolf out there might get you, or something will get you, But if you're strong enough to survive, and then once you got yourself, back in good position, so you come back 4 years later, bringing horses and gifts like buffalo robes and whatever to the family of the person who you killed, the mother and father. And you ask for their forgiveness and you give them these gifts. And usually 99% of the time they said they would accept your apology or your gifts. But what you do then is you become their son. But you also have your own mother and father here, and you're their son. So the burden falls on you to take care of two mothers, two fathers, and take care of, protect them, whatever. It makes your life hard for what you just did. You shouldn't. So that's why they frowned upon this, killing. And when these people killed the native people who came down to my grandfather's camp on the Grand River and they murdered him. I mean, they didn't all do it, but a couple of them did. Okay, when they did that, the minute his spirit left his body, we see in the Lakota culture, it's like a hoop, well connected, as as relatives, you know. But the minute they did that, that connection severed. And when that severed, they're over here, we're over here. Okay, and they did not get banished because you couldn't banish them. If you did, they would go to Denver or they would go to New
Right.
York or Philadelphia or someplace and live. So what they did is I didn't know this until I went to a ceremony, a Sundance, and the spirit came in there and told me. He said, "These people who killed me," he said, "they have to. You can't go up there and tell them they have to do this. They have to do it themselves. If they're Lakota, they could speak Lakota. They could know the songs. They look it. They look Lakota. They dress to go to powwows." But he says they have blood on their hands. And he says when they do a ceremony, they might say they're doing a ceremony, a purification ceremony. And no good spirit will come in there. No positive energy will come in there because the smell of that blood repels them. So he said, since my grandfather was who he was, a sun dancer who cared for the people, who gave his life for years, sacrificing his blood, sweat, and tears for the survival of the culture, survival of the people, that since they didn't do this, it's 4 generations. Instead of 4 years, it's 4 generations for them to come and heal, do a healing with the descendants, his descendants, which is myself, my sisters, and my grandchildren now, and my children, and whoever, my nieces and nephews, that to come and say, we want to do a healing ceremony with you, and be not just say I'm sorry. It's a you have to live out you have to walk your sovereignness. You have to once you because I'm always ready to forgive. I said sure, let's move on. But it seemed like they don't want to do that. I don't know. I mean, maybe they became Americanized because the Americans said we never apologize for what we do, and that's why maybe that's what they don't want to do. And I've been threatened if I ever go up to Standing Rock Indian Reservation, they would shoot me or whatever. They would kill me. And the only thing that my great grandfather had to do with Standing Rock Indian Reservation was he was murdered there, and his body's still buried up there. And I don't fear him. I'd go up there. I mean, I've been up there a couple times, and went to visit my grandfather's grave. And for a long time there, I used to go up there, and it was sad because the big grave was, I mean, the mound was there, and you smell like urine, alcohol. They go out there and they party on his grave. These people. I don't know if it's just a Lakota, but it could be from Mobridge too. The young white kids that come across, the Washita kids, and go over there and desecrate the grave. They throw beer bottles and wine bottles and whiskey bottles there, and the whole area was just glitter in the morning, sparkling from all of the busted wine bottles, beer bottles. Yeah, and they throw trash out there, and it's like, whenever they need something, they always say, "We're Sitting Bull's people." And I always tell people, I said, there are no direct descendants or relatives of Sitting Bull in Standing Rock. We're all enrolled at Pine Ridge because my great grandmothers left there in 1891 and went into the Badlands, which is within the Pine Ridge Reservation. And they hid out there for a while until the agency guy at the Pine Ridge Agency brought them in and enrolled them at Pine Ridge. And Pine Ridge is like a big refugee camp because the survivors of the Wounded Knee Massacre, the Minikoshu, they're enrolled at Pine Ridge. And there's a lot of Dakotas that surrendered with Crazy Horse, the Cheyennes and the Arapahoes. They speak Lakota, they're enrolled there. I had a good friend of mine, he's a Vietnam vet, but he passed away a couple of years ago. His name was Guy Dullknife Jr. Hence the name Dullknife. He was related to Chief Dullknife, the Cheyenne.
Wow.
And so, there's little communities across Pine Ridge which, identifies what tribe they're from, or where they were originally from. So it's not only my grandfather that just happened to. There's others that they turned against our spiritual people and got them killed, and they died. And so that's where the division comes from. You have the complete alienation from each other because of the uh, individuals who you could tell who did something because their descendants cannot attend ceremonies. I mean, I've been with a couple of individuals from Standing Rock who went to ceremony with me, and we went to a ceremony with them, and the spirits would come in the ceremony because of the smell of blood on their hands. And I said, and they told me what's the sad part about this is they told me after fourth generation, if they don't do a healing, the Creator will never recognize them as Lakota people. He said they could speak Lakota, look Lakota, sing songs, dress like Lakota, but they're not going to be recognized as Lakota. They're going to be a lost people. And, it hurts me, inside that why can't we heal that hoop, the sacred hoop, because it's broken in many places, not just in the Lakota, but across the land. Other leaders have been betrayed by their people and got them hurt, killed, or something, and it has to be healed. The connection has to heal to become a circle again, like we were at one time before the Americans came here. And a lot of the their values they last on to. One of them is the fear. The Lakota people never had fear, but now they do because the Americans live that way, to fit into the society over here. And I have nothing against education. I never was educated, I never, because I didn't want to be brainwashed by a man's book, what his will is in the book, just to get a degree hanging on the wall so I can. All my work I ever did in my life is OJT, on the job training. I was a land surveyor. I learned that through the guys I worked with. I drove 18 wheelers across the country, all 48 states, and I learned how to do that on my own. I was a plumber, I was a concrete finisher, I was a carpenter. I learned all these things without going to school. I never would working in an office building, because that wasn't my style.
No, it doesn't sound like your style. It seems like there's a message there lurking in these grievances. First question: Are they past 4 generations?
No, I'm the third generation.
You're third, so there's still some space and time for these people
Yeah,
to offer up their
they're
apology,
healing.
their
Yeah,
healing,
yeah.
um, and which raises an interesting thought: is what responsibility do the ancestors have for the sins of their forefathers?
Well, I I can't answer that question because it's them, not me. You know,
Right.
I looked at my history, see, and on either side of my mother's and father's side, if somebody murdered somebody and they didn't forgive, but nothing like that happened. So basically, I'm the one on this end. Where
Right.
my ancestor was wronged. And uh, I mean, I have nothing against these people. I don't hate them. I don't despise them. I don't, I know them because some of them are related to me, through my
Hmm.
sibling's mother and father. They come from his sisters or,
Right.
because he had all sisters. But a lot of them don't see that, because he was betrayed by his own nephew in the first place, how he got murdered, how he got killed. So basically them relatives, I know them, and I've met with them, but they're like they come around, but they back away. I mean, for a long time they're going around telling everybody, 80s, 90s, that they're direct descendants of Sitting Bull, and they're not. And when I came out of the woodwork in 1992 to tell the people we are related to this man, and there's no ifs, ands, ors about it. It's time to reset these records straight. And I was attacked. I was I mean, they used verbal threats toward me, and I told them, I said, I'm not afraid of you. I mean, been to war. I said, I served. I mean, I faced Charlie, the cobra snakes, and the tigers, and the leeches, and the heat. I said, what more can you do? I said, you can't hurt me. I said, if you do, I said, it's your fault. You're gonna have to answer for that one day in the eyes of the Creator. I mean, these are the things that you have to look at. I mean, I try to explain to people. If you point a gun at somebody and shoot them, you think, oh, well, I'm great. Okay, oh, I'm protecting myself or whatever. And that's not the answer. The answer is one day you're going to walk down the trail. I mean, most human beings right now are walking down an endless trail. I mean, there's nothing at the end. There's no ending to that trail, but into the abyss of suffering. I mean, there's no heaven or hell. The hell is what they create for themselves. Lakota culture. This is who we are. That's why we kept that balance within ourselves. I don't associate with many people. I don't have friends because I don't want to call people friends. Because if they're set in this little capitalistic ways of the Americans and they're stuck in there, they don't want to come out of there because that's their livelihood, they think. But that rut they're in has no direction back to the spirit for that soul that's inside that body. I don't look at people's outside, their skin color or who they are. It's their spirit that's in there. Spirit has no color. And that spirit was just like me one time. We knew each other in the spirit world. We all knew each other in the spirit world. We just came in different parts of this land to learn how to balance the ecosystem within ourselves. That's the knowledge that spirits can carry back to the spirit world. And through ceremonies, they told me we come 4 times as a spirit. And at the end of the 4th time, we should have the package of understanding who we are as a soul to be able to carry the values back to the spirit world, to be who we are. So this is who we are as Lakota people to understand and to share. And there's a lot of us have different callings. You know, Not everybody's a medicine man. They all want to be medicine men, but a medicine men that I knew don't want to be one. It's a hard life. It's the hardest life because if they get caught, they have to go. They cannot be. They have to be center line. They cannot criticize or they cannot uh, refuse somebody because they don't like you or you don't like them or whatever. And it's a hard life, And most of the stuff they do, they're running themselves ragged into the ground. Most medicine men that I ceremonied was telling me these things, but there's others that get called for things uh, like with me. I was chosen to be a messenger. They said, share this message with the people. To share with the older ones, when you reach a certain age, you're into this rut. You jump into that rut with these people. But if you're younger and you're just coming from the spirit world, you can understand what you're saying. Do not have fear. Do not have fear. Do not fear anything. Okay, that's what I was taught as a child growing up. Do not fear anything. Because if you have fear, there's an entity in Lakota we call Wakhan Shija, a sacred bad that likes to control the emotion, fear from people. And it's negative. It likes to draw negative energy into your soul, into your mind. And you could be one of the greatest people in the spirit world. We knew each other. But you're on this earth and you have fear. Wakhan Shija controls your thoughts. And you go off on a tangent and you're something that you shouldn't be. But you're caught in this rut. You can't get out of it. You can't let it go. If you let it go, and most Americans, when they let go of the fear,
Mm-hmm.
you become balanced. Other guys call them a wimp or pussy whip or something.
I would call that.
or, or, or the greatest emotions that Wakanda loves is humor and the tears of a man. And the man to have ultimate respect for the female, because the female is the one that got the wisdom. I'll tell you a story real quick.
Go ahead.
When the first man and the first woman were created, there was nobody else, just a man and a woman, and they're both standing there naked. And here comes the creator. And he told him, he says, I have two gifts. He says, your choice is yours. So he told the man, he says, the male, he says, I'll give you the first choice. He says, the first gift I have, he says, is your urinate standing up. But he said, okay, well, I'll take that.
I'll take it. Yeah.
And he says, you don't want to hear the second? He says, nope. He says, this I want that. So he said, okay. So he told the female, he says, see, since he took the first gift, urinate standing up, the second gift is yours. She said, that's wisdom. So a couple of days later, the man come and told the creator, he says, you know what I learned too? He says, what? He said, I can urinate sitting down too. See, so that's just a humor there that shows who we are as men.
That's right. Wow. So we're all united as humans, despite whatever our tribal affiliations are. Well, Conchisi, Crowfoot, Ernie LaPointe, this has been really a fantastic conversation for me, and a journey into not only your cultural world, but just your world as an individual. I want to say thank you, Pilamaya Yelo. Did I say it right?
Pilamaya Yelo.
Pilamaya
Yelo.
Pilamaya Yelo,
yeah,
which means thank you.
Yeah.
And I know, as you said earlier, that these translations from English into Lakota are a little clumsy, but when you just say the words that you've laid out here, and you sort of feel things that you might not say if you said sitting bull instead of Tatanke Iyotake. It resonates in a way that the English words can't take you to. So it's really
Then with us, when we're done conversing, we always say "Toksha ake." That's short for "Toksha ake wa chiyankiste." There's no word for goodbye. We say "Toksha ake" is "I'll see you again." We may never see each other in this life again, but we'll sure see each other in the spirit world if we get there together.
Doksha Ake.
Toksha ake, yeah.
Well, I'm going to stop the record, but before I do that, normally what I say as my goodbye is Namashaloha, which is namaste, shalom, and aloha. It's my own word. But for the purposes of this show, I want to thank you again in English and say Toksha
Okay.
Ake. Toksha.